I was sitting at my kitchen table on a Tuesday morning when my son Brad walked in without knocking. He started talking about needing money for his business expansion. I gently told him I couldn't help, that I needed to protect my savings for my future. Brad laughed out loud, his voice dripping with condescension. "What savings, Mom? You live in this tiny rental and drive a car from 2003. Before I could respond, my cell phone rang. It was First National Bank, asking to confirm I was the primary account holder. My hands were shaking as I answered the call. The woman on the other end identified herself as Sandra from the Fraud Prevention Department. She asked if I had attempted to add a joint account holder to my savings account that morning. My heart started racing. I told her no, absolutely not. I could feel Brad's eyes on me as Sandra explained that someone had submitted paperwork with what appeared to be a forged signature trying to gain access to my account. I glanced at Brad. His jaw was tight and he was suddenly very interested in his phone. Sandra asked me to verify my date of birth, my mother's maiden name, and the last 4 digits of my social security number. After I answered correctly, she said the fraud department had caught the discrepancy and stopped the transaction. She recommended I come into the branch as soon as possible to review the paperwork and add additional security measures to my accounts. Brad stood up abruptly, mumbling something about needing to get to work. He barely looked at me as he headed for the door. "We'll talk later, Mom," he said, and he was gone before I could say another word. The kitchen felt suddenly cold and empty. I sat there for a long moment, trying to make sense of what just happened. Who would try to access my account? And why did Brad leave so quickly after that phone call? A sick feeling settled in my stomach, but I pushed it away. Brad was my son. He wouldn't do something like that, would he? An hour later, I was sitting in a small office at First National Bank across from Carol Jensen, the branch manager. She was a professional woman in her mid-40s, with kind eyes and a serious expression. She slid a manila folder across the desk toward me. Inside were photocopies of documents that made my blood run cold. There was an authorization form to add a joint account holder. The signature at the bottom looked similar to mine, but not quite right. The loops were too wide. The slant was off. Someone had tried to copy my handwriting but hadn't quite managed it. The joint account holder listed was Bradley Thomas Harper, my son. "Mrs. Harper," Carol said gently, "we have security footage from this morning. Would you like to see it?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. She turned her computer monitor toward me and played the video. There was Brad, clear as day, standing at the counter at 8:30 that morning. He was talking to a teller, sliding papers across the counter, pointing at something on the form. The teller looked uncertain and walked away. A few minutes later, a supervisor approached Brad, examined the papers, and shook her head. Brad's face reddened. He argued for a moment, then gathered the papers and left. "Our teller noticed the signature didn't quite match what we have on file," Carol explained. "When she brought it to her supervisor, they realized this was likely fraud. That's when we called you." I felt like I couldn't breathe. My own son. My only child. The boy I raised, the man I sacrificed for, had tried to steal from me. Not just a little bit. If this had worked, he would have had full access to everything in that account. $73,000. Money I had saved over 35 years working as a school librarian, plus what was left from my late husband's life insurance policy after Tom died 8 years ago. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Carol folded her hands on the desk. "You can file a police report. This is attempted fraud and identity theft. Those are serious crimes. We can also add enhanced security to all your accounts. Require in-person verification for any changes. Additional passwords, that sort of thing." I thought about Brad sitting in a police station, about him with a criminal record, about holidays ruined, family gatherings destroyed. He was still my son. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe he was desperate and made a terrible mistake. "Can I think about the police report?" I asked. "I'd like to talk to him first, try to understand why." Carol looked at me with sympathy but also concern. "Mrs. Harper, people who attempt this kind of fraud rarely stop after one try. If he was willing to forge your signature and lie to bank employees, what else might he be willing to do?" I knew she was right, but I couldn't bring myself to call the police on my own child. Not yet. I agreed to the enhanced security measures, changed all my passwords, and required that any future changes to my accounts would need me to appear in person with 2 forms of identification. Carol made notes in my file and assured me my money was safe. As I drove home in my old 2003 Honda Accord, the car Brad had mocked just hours earlier, I thought about everything I had given him over the years. I paid for his college education. I helped him with his first car. When he and Chelsea got married, I gave them $5,000 toward their down payment on that big house in the suburbs. And this was how he repaid me. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I had made up my mind. I would confront him tonight. I would give him a chance to explain himself, to apologize, to make this right. Maybe we could get past this. Maybe it was all just a terrible misunderstanding. I should have known better. Brad's house was in a development called Meadowbrook Estates, one of those neighborhoods where all the homes looked almost identical with their beige vinyl siding and 2-car garages. I parked on the street and walked up the perfectly manicured lawn to their front door. Through the large window, I could see Brad and Chelsea moving around in their open-concept living room. I rang the doorbell. Chelsea answered, her blonde hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail, wearing yoga pants and an expensive-looking athletic top. She looked surprised to see me. "Donna, we weren't expecting you." She didn't invite me in right away, just stood there blocking the doorway. "I need to talk to Brad," I said firmly. "It's important." She hesitated, then stepped aside. "He's in the kitchen. Is everything okay?" I walked past her without answering. Brad was standing at their marble kitchen island, scrolling through his phone with a glass of wine in front of him. He looked up when I entered, and I saw something flicker across his face. Fear? Guilt? It was gone so quickly I couldn't be sure. "Mom, what are you doing here?" He set down his phone. "I think you know why I'm here, Brad." My voice was steady, calmer than I felt. "I went to the bank today. They showed me the paperwork. They showed me the security footage." For a moment he said nothing. Chelsea came up behind me, and I could feel her presence like a cold shadow. Then Brad's expression changed completely. The fear vanished, replaced by indignation. "So that's what this is about," he said, his voice rising. "I go to the bank to try to help you, and you accuse me of something terrible?" I blinked, confused. "Help me?" "Brad, you tried to forge my signature." "I didn't forge anything." He slammed his hand on the counter, making me flinch. "I was asking questions about setting up a trust for your protection. You're getting older, Mom. What happens if something happens to you? Someone needs to be able to access your accounts in an emergency." Chelsea moved to stand next to Brad, placing her hand on his arm in a show of solidarity. "Donna, we're just worried about you. Brad has been so concerned." "The bank said you tried to add yourself as a joint account holder," I said. But my voice sounded less certain now. "They said the signature was forged." "Because I was showing them a sample," Brad said, throwing his hands up. "I was explaining the situation and showing them what your signature looks like so they'd know it was legitimate when we came in together. But the teller misunderstood and thought I was trying to do it without you. It was all a miscommunication." I felt my resolve wavering. Could that be true? Had there been a misunderstanding? "And then you call the bank and make me look like a criminal," Brad continued, his voice wounded now. "My own mother thinks I'm trying to steal from her. Do you know how that makes me feel?" "Brad just loves you so much," Chelsea added, her voice sickeningly sweet. "We both do. We just want to make sure you're taken care of." "I can take care of myself," I said, but the words came out weaker than I intended. Chelsea exchanged a glance with Brad. "Donna, you forgot Emma's birthday last month. Our daughter. Your granddaughter. She was so hurt when no card came." My mind raced. Had I forgotten? Emma's birthday was in. When was it? September? Or was it August? Suddenly I couldn't remember. "I sent a card," I said, but now I wasn't sure. Had I? "You didn't," Chelsea said gently, like she was talking to a confused child. "And last time you were here for dinner, you told us the same story about your neighbor twice in one evening. You didn't even realize you were repeating yourself." "That's not true," I protested, but doubt was creeping in. I did tell stories. I was a talker. Had I repeated myself? Brad's expression softened into something that looked like pity. "Mom, this is exactly why I was at the bank. I'm worried about you. You're living alone in that rental. You're getting older. and I see these little signs. Forgetting things, getting confused. I just want to help. There's nothing wrong with my mind, I said, but even to my own ears, I sounded defensive and uncertain. Over the next hour, they continued to chip away at my certainty. Every time I tried to explain what the bank had told me, they had a reasonable-sounding explanation. They were so calm, so unified in their version of events. They made me feel like I was the one who was confused, who had misunderstood, who was seeing things that weren't there. By the time I left their house, my head was spinning. I drove home in a daze, replaying the conversation over and over. Maybe I had overreacted. Maybe Brad really was just trying to help. Maybe I was the problem. Over the next 3 days, Brad and Chelsea called me every morning and every evening. They were unfailingly sweet and concerned. Chelsea offered to help me organize my bills and paperwork. Brad suggested he could go with me to my next doctor's appointment to help me remember what the doctor said. They offered to take me grocery shopping so I wouldn't have to go alone. Their attention was overwhelming and suffocating, but it was also hard to resist. I had been alone since Tom died. My friends from the library had mostly drifted away after I retired. It was nice in a way to have people checking on me, even if their concern felt somehow wrong. On Saturday morning, I agreed to let them come over to help me organize my paperwork. I told myself I was being silly to have doubted Brad's intentions. He was my son. He loved me. Everything was fine. I had no idea what was coming. Saturday morning arrived with bright sunshine streaming through my kitchen window. I had spent the previous evening tidying up, feeling oddly nervous about Brad and Chelsea coming over. At 9 o'clock sharp, I heard a car pull into my driveway. I looked out the window and felt my stomach drop. Brad and Chelsea were getting out of their car, but they weren't alone. A man in an expensive charcoal suit was with them, carrying a leather briefcase. He was in his 50s with silver hair and an air of authority that made me immediately uncomfortable. I opened the door as they approached. "Brad, who is this?" "Mom, this is Gordon Pierce. He's an attorney who specializes in elder law and estate planning. I thought it would be helpful for him to be here while we go through your paperwork." Gordon extended his hand with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Harper, pleasure to meet you. Your son has expressed some concerns, and I'm here to help ensure everything is in order for your future." I shook his hand reluctantly, my mind racing. This didn't feel right. I didn't agree to meet with a lawyer. I thought you were just coming to help me organize. "We are," Chelsea said brightly, already moving past me into the house. "Gordon is just here to give us some professional guidance. It's all very routine." Before I could protest further, all three of them were inside my small living room. Gordon set his briefcase on my coffee table and opened it with 2 sharp clicks. He pulled out a stack of papers clipped together. "Mrs. Harper, why don't we all sit down?" Gordon gestured to my couch like it was his own home. I sat slowly in my armchair, feeling like I was losing control of the situation. Brad and Chelsea took the couch. Gordon remained standing, papers in hand, suddenly all business. "Your son has consulted with me regarding your current living situation and financial management capabilities," Gordon began, his voice formal and cold. "Based on his observations and concerns, we've prepared some documents that will help protect you and your assets going forward." He placed the papers on the coffee table in front of me. The words "Durable Power of Attorney" were printed across the top in bold letters. "This is a power of attorney document," Gordon continued. "It designates your son, Bradley Harper, as your agent with authority to make financial and medical decisions on your behalf. This is a very common arrangement for people in your situation." "My situation?" I looked at Brad. "What situation?" Brad leaned forward, his expression carefully concerned. "Mom, we've talked about this. The confusion, the memory issues. We just want to make sure someone can help you if you need it." "I don't need help," I said, my voice firmer now, "and I'm not signing anything." Gordon's expression didn't change. "Mrs. Harper, I understand this can feel overwhelming, but your son is only trying to protect you. Without proper legal arrangements in place, if something were to happen to you, if you became unable to manage your affairs, the court would have to get involved. That's expensive and time-consuming. This prevents that." "Nothing is going to happen to me," I said. "I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs." Chelsea made a small sound, something between a sigh and a laugh. "Donna, You're renting a tiny apartment at your age. You're driving a car that's over 20 years old. You clearly haven't been managing things well. The criticism stung, even though I knew it was manipulative. I rented because I liked the freedom of not maintaining a house alone. My car was old but reliable. These were choices I had made, not signs of incompetence. I choose to live simply, I said. That's not the same as being incapable. Gordon pulled out another paper. I've also prepared documentation for your son to become a joint account holder on your financial accounts. This ensures he can help with bills, deposits, and other transactions. The bank already said no to that, I pointed out. Because there was a misunderstanding, Brad said quickly. With proper legal paperwork, there won't be any issues. I looked at the documents again. The power of attorney would give Brad control over everything. My money, my medical care, where I lived, every aspect of my life. I would essentially be signing away my independence. No, I said firmly. I'm not signing these papers. I appreciate your concern, Brad, but this is too much. I don't need this level of help. The room fell silent. Gordon's expression hardened. Chelsea's sweet smile disappeared. Brad stood up, his jaw clenched. Mom, you're not thinking clearly, Brad said. This is exactly the kind of poor judgment we're worried about. My judgment is fine, I said, standing up to face him. You're my son and I love you, but I'm not giving you control of my life. Gordon closed his briefcase with a sharp snap. Mrs. Harper, I need to inform you of something. If you refuse to cooperate with reasonable protective measures, your son has the legal right to pursue a competency hearing in court. My blood ran cold. A what? A competency hearing, Gordon repeated. The court can evaluate whether you're capable of managing your own affairs. If the judge determines you're not competent, the court can appoint a guardian with full authority over your finances and personal decisions. That's ridiculous, I said, but my voice was shaking. There's nothing wrong with me. Unfortunately, that's not your determination to make, Gordon said coldly. Your son has been documenting incidents of confusion, memory loss, and poor judgment. He's spoken with your physician. My physician? I felt dizzy. Dr. Patterson? Dr. Patterson has expressed concerns, Brad said. I called him last month to discuss what I've been observing. You had no right to do that, I said, anger rising through my fear. Brad pulled out a folder from Chelsea's large purse. He opened it and started reading. October 3rd, you called me 3 times in one evening, each time forgetting you had already called. September 28th, you missed a dental appointment because you forgot to write it down. September 15th, you got confused about what day of the week it was when I called. None of that was true. I hadn't called him 3 times. I hadn't missed a dental appointment. I had been slightly confused about the date once because it was a holiday weekend, but that was normal. You're making things up, I said. I have phone records, Brad said. I have testimony from your landlord about concerning behavior. I have a statement from your former colleague who saw you at the grocery store and said you seemed disoriented. Chelsea pulled out more papers, typed notes with dates and descriptions of alleged incidents. Some were distortions of normal events, some were complete fabrications, but they looked official and detailed. We're not doing this to hurt you, Chelsea said, her voice returning to that patronizing sweetness. We're trying to help you. If you would just sign the papers, we can avoid going to court. We can handle everything privately, as a family. For 2 hours, they pressured me. Gordon used legal language and veiled threats. Brad alternated between fake concern and barely suppressed anger. Chelsea played the role of the caring daughter-in-law, offering tissues and water while delivering backhanded comments about my mental state. But I held firm. Some part of me, some core of strength I didn't know I still had, refused to bend. I kept saying no. No to the power of attorney. No to the joint accounts. No to signing away my independence. Finally, Gordon packed up his briefcase. His professional mask had slipped, revealing irritation and frustration. Mrs. Harper, you're making a serious mistake. You'll be hearing from us soon, through official channels. Brad wouldn't look at me as they headed for the door. Chelsea turned back with a smirk that she quickly covered with a look of false sympathy. We tried, Donna. Remember that. We tried to do this the easy way. The door closed behind them, and I stood in my living room trembling. I looked at the coffee table where the unsigned papers still Saturday. Through the window, I watched their car pull away. I had won this battle, but I had a terrible feeling the war was just beginning. Monday morning, I woke up with a sense of dread I couldn't shake. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, trying to convince myself that Brad and Chelsea would give up now that I had refused to sign their papers. But deep down, I knew better. At 10:30, there was a knock at my door. The postal carrier handed me a certified letter. My hands shook as I signed for it and carried it inside. The return address was from the County Superior Court. I tore open the envelope and pulled out the papers inside. The words swam in front of my eyes: Petition for Determination of Incapacity and Notice of Hearing. Brad had filed legal papers claiming I was no longer capable of managing my own affairs. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks from today at the courthouse downtown. I sank into a chair, reading through the petition with growing horror. Brad had listed multiple witnesses who would testify to my alleged incompetence. There was Chelsea, of course. Gordon Pierce, the attorney. Someone named Sylvia Monroe, who I didn't even know. And most shocking of all, Dr. Raymond Patterson, my physician of 12 years. Dr. Patterson was going to testify against me? The man who had treated my arthritis, my occasional bronchitis, who had talked me through my grief after Tom died? I couldn't believe it. There had to be a mistake. I called his office immediately. The receptionist, a young woman named Tina, answered in her usual cheerful voice. "I need to speak with Dr. Patterson," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's urgent." "He's with patients right now, Mrs. Harper. Can I take a message?" "No, I need to see him today. It's an emergency." There was a pause. "Is this a medical emergency? Should you go to urgent care?" "It's personal. Please. I've been his patient for 12 years. I need to talk to him." Another pause, some muffled conversation in the background. "He can see you at 4:30 this afternoon, but only for 15 minutes. I spent the rest of the day in anxious agony. At 4:15, I was sitting in the waiting room of Dr. Patterson's office, my leg bouncing with nervous energy. When Tina called my name, I practically jumped out of my chair. Dr. Patterson's office was familiar and comfortable, filled with medical books and photos of his grandchildren. But when he entered, everything felt wrong. His usual warm smile was absent. He sat down behind his desk with a professional distance I had never felt from him before. "Mrs. Harper," Tina said this was urgent. "What's going on?" I pulled out the court papers and placed them on his desk. "This is what's going on. Brad filed a petition saying I'm incompetent and you're listed as a witness. Why would you agree to testify against me?" Dr. Patterson glanced at the papers but didn't pick them up. "I received a subpoena last week. I don't have a choice about testifying. But what will you say? There's nothing wrong with me, you know that." He folded his hands on the desk. "Mrs. Harper, your son called me about 3 weeks ago. He expressed some serious concerns about changes in your behavior and cognitive function." "What changes?" "I haven't had any changes." He described several incidents: memory lapses, confusion about dates and appointments, difficulty managing your finances. "None of that is true." My voice rose, and I forced myself to calm down. "Brad is lying. He's making things up because he tried to steal from me. And when that didn't work, he's trying to take control legally." Dr. Patterson's expression was sympathetic, but distant. "I understand this is stressful. Family conflicts around aging and independence are very common. But your son seemed genuinely concerned. Did you even ask me about any of this? Did you examine me or test me or anything?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Based on your son's report and some notes I reviewed from your previous visits, I wrote a letter supporting his concerns." "What notes? What previous visits?" "I've been completely healthy." "You mentioned some forgetfulness at your appointment in August. You said you had written something down twice because you forgot you already wrote it." I remembered that appointment. I had mentioned, in passing, that I had made 2 grocery lists because I forgot I made the first one, and it was still in my other purse. It was a throwaway comment, not a sign of dementia. "That was just a casual comment," I said. "Everyone forgets small things. That doesn't mean I'm incompetent." "Mrs. Harper, I'm required to testify to what was discussed. I'm sorry if this feels like a betrayal, but I have to be honest about the concerns that were raised." I stared at him. This man I had trusted with my health for over a decade. He hadn't questioned Brad's story. He hadn't called me to verify anything. He had simply taken my son's word and written a letter that could destroy my independence. "You should have asked me," I said quietly. "Before you wrote anything, you should have asked me." His expression flickered with something that might have been guilt. "I'm sorry you feel that way." I stood up, taking the papers with me. "I'm finding a new doctor, someone who will actually talk to me before making judgments about my mental state." I left his office feeling betrayed and frightened. If Dr. Patterson would testify against me without even examining me properly, what chance did I have in court? When I got home, there was a voicemail on my phone from Phyllis Brennan, my neighbor. Phyllis was a retired nurse in her early 70s who lived in the unit next to mine. We weren't close friends, but we were friendly. We watered each other's plants when one of us went out of town. We shared vegetables from our small patio gardens in the summer. I called her back immediately. "Phyllis, it's Donna. You called?" "Oh, Donna, yes. I wanted to warn you about something. Your son stopped by yesterday asking me questions about you." My heart sank. "What kind of questions?" "Strange things. He wanted to know if I had noticed you seeming confused or forgetful, if you had trouble finding your keys or left your door unlocked, if I had ever smelled gas or smoke coming from your unit, like you might have left the stove on." "What did you tell him?" "I told him absolutely not, that you're sharp as a tack and I've never noticed anything concerning at all. But he kept pushing, asking if I was sure, saying he was worried about you." Honestly, Donna, it felt like he was trying to get me to say something negative. It made me uncomfortable, so I wanted to tell you. "Thank you, Phyllis. Thank you so much for letting me know. Is everything okay? What's going on?" I gave her a brief explanation of the court hearing and Brad's petition. Phyllis was silent for a moment, then said, "That's awful. If you need a character witness or someone to testify that you're perfectly fine, I'll do it. I'll tell the judge exactly what I told you. You're one of the most together people I know." Her offer brought tears to my eyes. "I might take you up on that." After hanging up with Phyllis, I started making calls to other people in my life. My friend Martha from church, the clerk at the post office who I chatted with every week, the manager at the grocery store where I had shopped for years. The pattern became clear. Brad had contacted almost everyone, planting seeds of doubt about my competence. Some people, like Phyllis, had seen through it and refused to cooperate. Others, like the grocery store manager, had believed Brad's concerned son act, and might be willing to say they had noticed me seeming a bit off or more forgetful lately. Brad had been planning this for weeks, maybe longer. The bank fraud attempt wasn't his first move, it was just the first one I had caught. He had been systematically building a case against me, recruiting witnesses, manipulating medical professionals, creating a paper trail of manufactured evidence. I sat in my living room as the sun set, surrounded by the life I had built. The photos of Tom and me on our wedding day, the bookshelf full of my favorite novels, the Afghan I had knitted last winter, the small, simple, comfortable home I had created for myself. And Brad was trying to take it all away. I had no lawyer. I had no idea how to fight this in court. I had 2 weeks to figure out how to prove I was competent, when Brad had spent months setting up a case to prove I wasn't. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt truly hopeless. 1 week before the hearing, I was sorting through my mail when I found an envelope from my landlord, Mr. Harold Fisher. My hands were already shaking before I even opened it. Inside was a formal eviction notice. I had 30 days to vacate the premises. The reason listed was concerns about tenants' mental fitness and safety issues that may pose a risk to the property. I grabbed my phone and called Mr. Fisher immediately. He answered on the 3rd ring, and I could hear the discomfort in his voice before he even said hello. "Mr. Fisher, it's Donna Harper. I just got your eviction notice. What is this about?" "Mrs. Harper," he sighed heavily. "Your son came to see me 4 days ago. He told me some very concerning things." "What things?" "He said you've been leaving the stove on, that you forget to lock your doors at night, that you've been confused and disoriented. He's worried you might start a fire or hurt yourself. He said as a landlord, I could be liable if something happens." "None of that is true," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Mr. Fisher, I've rented from you for 9 years. Have I ever been late on rent? Have I ever caused any problems?" "No, you've been a model tenant. That's why this is so hard. But your son was very convincing. He seemed genuinely worried about you. He even offered to cover any costs for breaking the lease early, if I would act quickly for your safety. He's lying. He's trying to force me out because he wants control of my finances. Please, you have to believe me." There was a long pause. "Mrs. Harper, I don't want to get in the middle of a family situation. I've already filed the eviction paperwork. I'm sorry, but my decision is final. You have 30 days. The line went dead. I stared at the phone in disbelief. Brad had taken away my home. 2 days later, the situation got worse. I went to the grocery store and tried to pay with my debit card. It was declined. I tried again. Declined. The cashier looked at me with pity as I fumbled for the credit card I rarely used. That one worked, thankfully, but my stomach was churning with anxiety. As soon as I got home with my groceries, I called the bank. The automated system told me my checking account balance was unavailable. I pressed 0 frantically until I got a real person. "This is Donna Harper. My debit card was just declined. What's wrong with my account?" "Let me check, Mrs. Harper." The representative was quiet for a moment. "It looks like your account has been frozen due to a fraud investigation." "What fraud investigation?" "It says here that a complaint was filed suggesting possible elder financial exploitation. The bank is required to freeze accounts during the investigation to protect you. This can take 3 to 6 weeks to resolve." "Who filed the complaint?" "It was submitted anonymously through our online reporting system." I felt my legs go weak. I sank into a chair. "Can you tell me when it was filed?" 5 days ago. The same time Brad went to see my landlord. The same time he started executing this new phase of his plan. "I need access to my money," I said. "I have bills to pay. I need to find a new place to live. I can't wait 6 weeks." "I'm sorry, Mrs. Harper, but we have to follow protocol. The fraud division will be in touch with you soon to discuss the investigation." After I hung up, I checked my savings account. It was frozen, too. I had maybe $400 in cash at home. That was all the money I could access. I couldn't pay next month's rent. Not that it mattered since I was being evicted. I couldn't put down a deposit on a new apartment. I couldn't hire a lawyer to fight the competency hearing that was now only 5 days away. Brad had checkmated me perfectly. My accounts were frozen, which made me look financially incompetent. I was being evicted, which made me look like I couldn't maintain stable housing. I had no access to funds to defend myself in court. Every move Brad made created more evidence for his case. I sat at my kitchen table with my head in my hands. For the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to feel truly trapped. I had always been independent, capable, strong. Now I was facing homelessness and the loss of my autonomy, and there seemed to be nothing I could do to stop it. That evening, my phone rang. It was Chelsea. "Donna," she said in that sweet, poisonous voice, "I heard about your bank accounts being frozen. That must be so stressful for you." "How did you know about that?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Brad's been so worried. He just wants to help. You know, if you had signed those papers last week, none of this would be happening. We could have helped you sort out the bank situation. We could have talked to your landlord. We still can, if you're willing to be reasonable." The message was crystal clear. Surrender control or lose everything. "I'm not signing anything," I said. "That's too bad," Chelsea said. "I really hope you don't end up homeless, Donna. That would be such a shame at your age." She hung up before I could respond. I walked to my bedroom and opened the closet. In the back, behind my winter coats, was a small fireproof safe. Inside was the $400 in cash, my important documents, and a few pieces of jewelry that had belonged to my mother. I sat on the edge of my bed holding that safe, realizing it contained everything I could access in the world right now. The court hearing was in 5 days. I had no lawyer, no money to hire one, no home, and a son who was systematically destroying my life to get control of my savings. The life I had built, the independence I had fought for since Tom died, was crumbling around me. I thought about just giving up, signing the papers, letting Brad take control. At least then I would have a place to live. At least then the nightmare would be over. But something in me, some stubborn core that had survived Tom's death and decades of working and saving and building a life alone, refused to surrender. I didn't know how I was going to fight this, but I knew I had to try. The morning of the hearing, I woke up at 5 o'clock after barely sleeping. I put on my best dress, a navy blue one I had worn to church for years. I did my hair and makeup carefully, wanting to look as put together and competent as possible. Then I drove downtown to the courthouse in my old Honda, praying the whole way that somehow, some way, this would turn out okay. The courthouse was a massive concrete building that made me feel small and insignificant. I found the right courtroom on the 3rd floor and sat on a bench outside, waiting for them to call the case. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. At 9:15, Brad arrived with Chelsea, Gordon Pierce, and Dr. Patterson. They walked past me without acknowledging my presence. Brad was wearing an expensive suit. Chelsea had on a tailored dress and heels. They looked successful, put together, trustworthy. I felt like a shabby old woman in my outdated dress and sensible shoes. At 9:30, a bailiff called us into the courtroom. Judge Catherine Morrison presided. She was a woman in her mid-50s with steel gray hair pulled back severely and an expression that gave nothing away. The courtroom was formal and intimidating, with dark wood paneling and high ceilings. Brad and his lawyer sat at one table. I sat alone at the other. I had tried to find a lawyer, but no one would take my case without a retainer I couldn't pay with my accounts frozen. Judge Morrison looked at the papers in front of her, then at me. "Mrs. Harper, you're representing yourself in this matter?" "Yes, Your Honor. I can't afford a lawyer right now because my bank accounts are frozen." Gordon Pierce stood immediately. "Your Honor, the fact that Mrs. Harper's accounts are frozen due to concerns about financial exploitation is actually relevant to this case. It demonstrates the very vulnerabilities we're here to address." I wanted to scream that Brad was the one who filed the anonymous complaint to freeze my accounts, but I didn't know how to prove it. "We'll get to that," Judge Morrison said. "Mr. Pierce, present your case." For the next hour, Gordon methodically built Brad's case. He presented the folder of documented incidents showing my alleged confusion and forgetfulness. He called Dr. Patterson to the stand. "Doctor." Patterson testified about the concerns Brad had raised and the comment I had made about making duplicate grocery lists. He made it sound like early dementia rather than a normal slip of memory. Mr. Fisher, my landlord, testified next. He explained that he felt he had no choice but to evict me after Brad reported dangerous behaviors like leaving the stove on. The fact that these behaviors never actually happened didn't seem to matter. Brad's word was enough. A woman I barely recognized took the stand. Gordon introduced her as Sylvia Monroe, a former colleague from the library where I had worked. She testified that she had run into me at the grocery store 3 months ago, and I had seemed disoriented and confused, struggling to remember her name. That was a complete lie. I had never had trouble remembering Sylvia. We had only worked together for 1 year before she transferred to another branch. We weren't close. But her testimony, delivered with apparent reluctance and sympathy, sounded credible. Chelsea testified about my declining condition and how Brad had tried everything to help me, but I refused all assistance. She painted a picture of a stubborn, confused elderly woman too proud to admit she needed help. Finally, Brad took the stand. He played his role perfectly, the concerned son, heartbroken that his mother couldn't see she needed help. He described the bank incident, framing it as him trying to set up protection for me, and me becoming paranoid and accusatory. He mentioned the eviction, the frozen accounts, all the disasters in my life, as evidence that I couldn't manage my affairs. Gordon presented the power of attorney documents I had refused to sign as evidence of my poor judgment. He argued that any reasonable person in my situation would welcome help from a loving family member, but my refusal proved I wasn't thinking clearly. By the time they finished presenting their case, I felt like I was drowning. Every piece of evidence, even the disasters Brad himself had caused, had been twisted to make me look incompetent. Then it was my turn. Judge Morrison looked at me expectantly. "Mrs. Harper, would you like to present your defense?" I stood up, my legs shaky. I didn't have exhibits or witnesses or legal arguments. All I had was the truth. "Your Honor, my son is lying. He tried to steal from me by forging my signature at the bank. When that didn't work, he started this campaign to make me look incompetent. He filed the complaint that froze my bank accounts. He convinced my landlord to evict me by telling lies about me leaving the stove on. He's manufactured all this evidence because he wants control of my savings. $73,000 that I saved over 35 years. As I spoke, I could hear how it sounded. Paranoid, defensive, like the rambling of someone who couldn't accept reality. Gordon Pierce was shaking his head sadly. Chelsea was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "Do you have any evidence to support these claims?" Judge Morrison asked. "The bank has security footage of Brad trying to forge my signature." "That incident was explained," Gordon interjected. "Mr. Harper was attempting to set up protective measures for his mother's benefit. The bank misunderstood his intentions." "Your Honor, I'm not confused. I'm not forgetful. I'm a victim of financial exploitation by my own son. But even to my own ears, I sounded desperate and delusional. I had no proof, no documentation, no witnesses who would contradict Brad's story. I was just an older woman living alone in a rental, being evicted, with frozen bank accounts, claiming her successful son was lying about everything." Judge Morrison looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. "Mrs. Harper, I'm going to take a short recess to review all the evidence. We'll reconvene in 30 minutes. The bailiff called for everyone to rise as the judge left. I sank back into my chair, feeling defeated. Brad and his team gathered in the hallway, whispering and looking confident. I sat alone in the courtroom, certain I had lost everything. 20 minutes into the recess, the courtroom door opened. I looked up and saw Carol Jensen from the bank. She wasn't alone. With her was another woman carrying a briefcase and an official-looking folder. Carol approached me quickly. "Mrs. Harper, I'm so glad we made it in time. This is Iris Walsh from our Fraud Investigation Division. We have information the judge needs to see." Hope sparked in my chest for the first time in weeks. "What information?" "Everything," Iris said. "We've been investigating since you first reported the attempted fraud. We need to speak with the judge immediately." When Judge Morrison returned, Carol requested permission to approach the bench. The judge looked surprised but allowed it. Gordon Pierce stood up, objecting, but the judge waved him off. "I'm Carol Jensen, branch manager at First National Bank," Carol said. "We have evidence directly relevant to this case that contradicts Mr. Harper's testimony." Judge Morrison's expression sharpened with interest. "Proceed." For the next 20 minutes, Carol and Iris presented their findings. They had the original documentation of Brad's attempted fraud with the forged signature. They had a complete history of Brad's inquiries about my accounts going back 6 months. They showed evidence that Brad had significant debts, a failed business, credit card bills, a previous incident of check fraud 7 years ago that had been settled privately to avoid prosecution. Most damning of all, Iris had traced the anonymous complaint that froze my accounts. It had been filed from Brad's home IP address. Mr. Harper deliberately froze his mother's accounts to create the appearance of financial incompetence, Iris explained. "This is a sophisticated exploitation scheme. He created the very problems he's claiming as evidence of her incapacity." Judge Morrison's expression had gone from neutral to stern. She looked at Brad, whose face had gone pale. Gordon Pierce was whispering urgently to him. "We also have testimony from Mrs. Harper's neighbor, Phyllis Brennan, if the court would like to hear it," Carol added. "She's willing to testify that Mrs. Harper shows no signs of confusion or incompetence, and that Mr. Harper specifically tried to recruit her to provide false testimony." Judge Morrison called for another recess, this one longer. I watched her disappear into her chambers with all the new evidence. Carol and Iris sat with me, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel alone. "How did you know to come today?" I asked. "Your neighbor Phyllis called us last week," Carol explained. "She told us what Brad was doing and about the court hearing. We had been investigating the frozen accounts and had already discovered Brad filed the complaint. When we put everything together, we realized we needed to present this to the judge." When Judge Morrison returned 45 minutes later, her expression was thunderous. The courtroom fell silent. "I've reviewed the evidence presented by First National Bank," she began. "What I've seen is deeply troubling. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe." Judge Morrison looked directly at Brad, and her voice was cold, with controlled anger. "Mr. Harper, the evidence shows that you have engaged in a calculated scheme to defraud your mother and seize control of her assets through manipulation of the legal system. You attempted to forge her signature to gain access to her bank accounts. When that failed, You orchestrated a series of events designed to make her appear incompetent, including filing a false complaint to freeze her accounts, convincing her landlord to evict her through lies, and recruiting witnesses to provide misleading testimony. Brad started to speak, but Judge Morrison held up her hand. I am not finished. This court takes elder exploitation extremely seriously. What you have done is not only morally reprehensible, but also illegal. She turned to the documents in front of her. The petition for determination of incapacity is denied in its entirety. Mrs. Harper has demonstrated no evidence of actual incompetence. The alleged evidence presented by petitioner is either fabricated or deliberately misrepresented. Relief flooded through me so powerfully I thought I might collapse. Furthermore, Judge Morrison continued, I am issuing a restraining order prohibiting Bradley Harper from contacting Donna Harper or attempting to access any of her financial information. I am referring this case to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of potential criminal charges, including attempted fraud, identity theft, and elder financial abuse. Gordon Pierce gathered his papers quickly, his face red. Brad looked stunned, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Chelsea was crying, but not with sympathy anymore. These were tears of shock and fear. Mrs. Harper, the judge said, her voice softening slightly, I am providing you with a court order to present to your bank immediately unfreezing all your accounts. I am also providing you with a court order to present to your landlord. This eviction was procured through fraud and is hereby invalidated. Thank you, Your Honor, I managed to say, my voice breaking. After the hearing ended, Carol and Iris walked with me out of the courtroom. In the hallway, Brad tried to approach me. His face was a mixture of desperation and anger. Mom, please, we need to talk. I can explain. I looked at him, this man who had tried to destroy me, and felt a strange mixture of sadness and strength. No, Brad, we don't need to talk. Not now. Maybe not ever. What you did was unforgivable. You tried to steal from me. You tried to take away my independence, my home, my dignity. You lied to everyone who trusted you. I was just worried about you, he said, but the words sounded hollow even to him. You were worried about my money, I corrected. If you ever want a relationship with me again, you need to get help. Real help. Professional help. You need to figure out why you thought it was acceptable to do this to your own mother. Until then, stay away from me. Chelsea tried to grab my arm. Donna, please, think about Emma. She needs her grandmother. I pulled away from her touch. Emma will always be my granddaughter, and I love her. But her parents need to face the consequences of what they've done. When Brad is ready to make real amends, when he's gotten help and shown genuine change, maybe we can talk about rebuilding something. But not today. I walked away from them, flanked by Carol and Iris, and I didn't look back. Over the next few weeks, my life slowly came back together. The bank unfroze my accounts immediately. I met with Mr. Fisher and showed him the court order. He was embarrassed and apologetic, admitting he had been manipulated. He tore up the eviction notice and offered to reduce my rent for 3 months as an apology. I accepted. The district attorney's office moved forward with criminal charges against Brad. He was charged with attempted fraud, identity theft, and elder financial exploitation. Gordon Pierce, the lawyer, faced an ethics investigation by the state bar. Dr. Patterson called to apologize, explaining that he had been misled and asking if I would return as a patient. I told him I would think about it. Brad eventually pleaded guilty as part of a plea agreement. He was sentenced to 2 years of probation, ordered to pay me restitution for all the expenses I incurred defending myself, and required to attend counseling. He also had to perform 200 hours of community service. Chelsea filed for divorce 3 months later, citing irreconcilable differences. I felt sad about that for Emma's sake, but I also knew Chelsea had been a willing participant in Brad's scheme. I moved my money to a new bank with enhanced security features. I met with an attorney who specialized in elder law, this time one I chose myself, and we created proper estate planning documents with protections to prevent anyone from taking advantage of me in the future. But the most important change happened inside me. I had spent weeks feeling helpless and frightened, doubting myself and my own judgment. Brad and Chelsea had tried to gaslight me into believing I was incompetent. They had almost succeeded. Coming through that experience, surviving it, fighting back and winning, had changed me. I was stronger than I knew. I was more resilient than I had believed. and I was absolutely certain now that I could trust my own instincts. 6 months after the hearing, I started volunteering at the Senior Advocacy Center downtown. I met with older adults who were experiencing financial exploitation or family pressure. I shared my story. I helped them recognize the warning signs. I walked them through the process of protecting themselves and fighting back when necessary. It was the most meaningful work I had done since retiring from the library. Every person I helped, every family exploitation scheme we stopped, felt like a victory not just for them, but for me too. I had turned my painful experience into something that could help others. One Tuesday evening, I was at the Advocacy Center giving a presentation to a group of about 30 seniors about recognizing financial exploitation. I talked about the tactics manipulators use: isolation, gaslighting, creating false emergencies, recruiting others to support their narrative. I talked about the importance of trusting yourself and seeking help. At the end of the presentation, an older man raised his hand. What if the person trying to control you is your own child? How do you fight back when you still love them? It was a question I knew intimately. Loving someone doesn't mean letting them hurt you, I said. Setting boundaries isn't unloving. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and for them, is to hold them accountable. My son needed to face consequences. He needed to understand that his behavior was wrong. If I had given in, if I had signed those papers and let him take control, I wouldn't have been helping him. I would have been enabling him. The man nodded thoughtfully, and I saw recognition in his eyes. After the presentation, several people came up to thank me and share their own experiences. An older woman named Ruth told me her daughter had been pressuring her to sell her house and move in with her. Ruth loved her independence but felt guilty for refusing. We talked for 20 minutes about how she could maintain her relationship with her daughter while still protecting her autonomy. As I drove home that evening, I thought about everything that had happened. 12 months ago, I had been sitting in my kitchen with Brad mocking my savings and a phone ringing with news that would change everything. I had been so close to losing it all, but I hadn't lost. I had fought back, and now I was using that experience to help others fight back too. The betrayal still hurt sometimes. I still felt sad when I thought about Brad and how our relationship might never fully recover. I missed my granddaughter Emma terribly. But I didn't regret standing up for myself. I didn't regret refusing to sign those papers or fighting the competency hearing. I had protected my independence, my dignity, and my future. I had learned that your worth isn't measured by what others think you should do or who they think you should be. It's measured by your courage to stand up for yourself when everything tells you to give in. I had almost lost everything because I wanted to believe the best in someone who didn't deserve that trust. But I had found something more valuable: my own voice and the strength to use it. As I pulled into my driveway and looked at my modest rental home, I felt a sense of peace. This was my life, lived on my terms. I had my independence. I had my savings, earned through decades of hard work. I had my dignity, and I had discovered a strength inside myself I never knew existed. Brad had tried to take everything from me, but in the end, all he had done was show me how much I was capable of surviving and overcoming. That was a gift, even if he never meant it to be. I was 70 years old, living in a rental, driving an old car, and I had never been more certain of who I was and what I was worth. That certainty, that strength, that was my real savings. And no one could ever take it away. Now I want to hear from you. Have you or someone you know ever experienced manipulation or exploitation by a family member? How did you find the strength to stand up for yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you or helped you in any way, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and triumph. Share this with anyone who might need to hear it, because sometimes knowing you're not alone makes all the difference. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it reminds you that you're stronger than you think, and your voice matters. Take care of yourselves, and remember, your independence and dignity are always worth fighting for.